Under armed escort, the three women were driven to Bergen County Jail. The van parked in the prison's sally port, and Rasha, her mother, and sister were met by the prison's correctional officers and led in handcuffs from the vehicle, where they were strip-searched and photographed before being taken to one of the prison's holding areas. Rasha had barely recovered from the violation of the strip search when she found herself staring at the scene in front of her. The holding cell was filthy, disgusting, and overcrowded. People milled about, waiting to hear their cell assignments, and everybody seemed nasty or catatonic. This is just like prison on television, Rasha thought, and she was frightened for herself and for her mother. The correctional officer opened the door and told them to get inside. The door locked behind them. For 6 hours they were stuck waiting in the holding cell, as if holding meant a place where you were holding on to A, family, or B, your sanity. It scared her to the white of her bones, and when they finally heard their names called, the women sighed in relief. But their respite was short-lived. They were merely herded into another holding cell, teeming with even more people, the most crowded place Rasha could imagine, and they would stay there for 2 days. Rasha broke down and sobbed. During this time, Rasha's mother raged and yelled until she was able to place a call to her brother-in-law about her youngest sons. She looked so relieved to hear that her children were managing, and she related in detail to her brother-in-law how she and the family were being held. Rasha, Reem, and their mother were eventually moved again to a larger space, a wing of the facility, where they were again strip-searched, then given beige jumpsuits and black and white Converse shoes, and assigned to cells. Rasha kept thinking about what the INS official had told them at Federal Plaza, that they would be detained for 3 days tops, then deported. But when they joined the general population, another realization hit. They were going to be staying for a while. When Rasha looked at her new address, she saw a huge room with cells lining the wall. Correctional officers stood in a separate area that was elevated behind glass, and in front of the cells, from their perch, they could watch the inmates constantly. Rasha looked at the assignment and thought, they keep us like lab rats. She and Reem were assigned to the same cell, 2 unhappy beds and a stainless steel toilet. They were given blankets, thick, itchy blankets made of some kind of Stone Age material that didn't even seem to bend. It was like sleeping under hairy cardboard. And they began to live, or at least survive there. It was so much to deal with, and it had all happened so fast, and Rasha became extremely depressed. Prison was mostly a terrible tedium that promoted an inconsolable apathy. You stopped caring. She would lie on her bed for days on end. Thinking about her feelings, she felt demeaned and humbled. She'd had setbacks in the past, but she had never been this sad, this powerless, this misunderstood. She contemplated hurting herself. She considered suicide. She had never felt more human, and she discovered that being human means being vulnerable. For a while she stopped eating. She would lie on her bed sometimes for 2 or 3 days, continuously, finally lugging herself out of bed one day when the cell door opened so she could join the others to eat. Like lab rats, she thought. She slowly snapped out of her depression, but she couldn't stop feeling angry. She tried to transform her anger into a life lesson, to believe that God was trying to show her the nature of her humanity. But she felt wronged. Never in her life had she thought that she would end up in jail unless she had committed a crime. So why was she here? For what? Because she had overstayed her visa and was now undocumented? She didn't commit a crime, and she wasn't being punished for someone else's acts, for someone else's crime. She had been convicted. She hadn't been convicted. She had been abducted. This wasn't justice. It was revenge. She watched her mother become a praying machine. She began to observe the little things the inmates would do for survival, to keep a sense of autonomy, or in whatever small fashion, over their own destiny. One woman would swipe the pint-sized milk cartons from her meals and store them in the toilet because they stayed colder that way. When Rasha's mother saw this, she freaked out. "Oh my God," she told her daughters at a meal one day. "They put milk in the toilet. Why? Why do they put milk in the toilet?" And Rasha saw her mother slowly begin to mingle with the other inmates, which relieved her, as she never expected it would. Her mother shared a cell with another woman, and Rasha, in her cell, was becoming closer to her sister. They had often fought while growing up, but now they were close. The two girls held each other's sanity like a locket, and Rasha felt the life breathing back into her. She and Reem began crackling all kinds of jokes about prison life, jokes that Rasha has since blocked out. They played games with each other. They looked down at their prison-issue jumpsuits and Converse shoes and resolved never to wear Converse shoes again. Over time, they met the rest of the inmates, Pakistani women, Arab women, and other Muslims detained under similar circumstances. Russians and Israelis were also there, usually for immigration reasons. A smaller group of Asians and a much larger population of Latinas and African American women held mostly on drug-related charges. They found out that the other immigration detainees had been incarcerated for days, weeks, and sometimes months. This discovery was not comforting. But if the holding area reminded her of TV prison, the prison wing was different. On TV, inmates are constantly in your face, goading you into fights, organizing into gangs, and carving out turf. But at Bergen, Rasha eventually found out that the women were there because of crimes they'd committed just to get on with their lives, to make money, to survive. Petty theft, smuggling, and dealing were their offenses. It didn't matter if the women were serving criminal sentences or were detained for immigration violations. Everyone was incarcerated together. And slowly Rasha and her sister and mother learned that the women in jail, both immigrant and criminal prisoners, were kind with each other. The system had turned all of them into caged specimens. and as a way of defeating it, the inmates shared in a surplus of goodwill for one another. Being treated as beasts grew their humanity to one another. It was how everyone survived. The situation was different with the correctional officers. They spoke to the inmates as if they were gods, and the inmates a subhuman species. Rasha found them ignorant and abusive. They carried their authority like a truncheon. They walked around like Mack trucks shaking the highway, and they steamrolled over you like they were a fly stuck on hot tar. They yelled at you, they ignored you, they terrified you. Here the gods were the beasts.